I'm going to give each of these doughs its first shaping on a little bit of semolina and going round each loaf, stretching the dough over itself, making sure the seam stays in place. And when I turn it over, I've already created a little bit of tension. I'm not trying to do all the tension at this point because I'm going to give it a second shaping in a little while. Each of these will get bench rest of about 15 minutes before I give them their second shaping. Whilst those doughs are resting, we can prepare the bannetons. These we used yesterday. They've got semolina, a little bit of old dough stuck in there. So we're going to get rid of that by giving them a good tap out. Also gets rid of anything that might have found its way in there. I'll get a little brush and brush out these grooves so that I get really nice definition on the bread. I do that for each of the bannetons, and then a generous dusting with semolina. I prefer to use semolina because it's so much more non-stick than flour. If flour gets a little bit moist, it can turn to glue and stick your bread to the banneton. Semolina much more absorbent. The dough's had 15 minutes or so rest and is now ready for stage 2 shaping. Everything I do now is done fairly carefully because I don't want to damage the outer crust of the bread, nor do I want to damage the inner structure, which is rising and getting more bubbly even as we speak. What I do want to do is create lots of tension in the outside of the dough so that it doesn't slump as it's rising, and it doesn't slump when it goes in the oven, and we get the best possible rise. So I'm gently flattening that down a bit. Now I want to tension it in this direction, so I'm going to stretch it out, bring one wing in, second wing in. Notice that every time I fold, I make sure it's stuck, so I don't then release that tension. So I hold that down or put a little stitch in it like that. Now I'm going to roll it up nice and tight. And to do that, I get my fingers under the front, roll the dough over itself, press down and pull back towards me, creating a nice tension in this part of the dough. And again. And again. As many times as I need to get to the final seam. And then I want to make sure that that seam is absolutely bomb-proof. So I really pinch that together like that. So it's definitely not going to release that tension. And you can see that this now looks plump and bouncy and springy, even though it's soft inside because it's already somewhat risen. It's got a nice tight exterior, keeping it all together and keeping it sitting up. And then that's ready to go into the basket, and it will sit there for 4 or 5 hours until I'm ready to bake. These loaves have now had 5 hours fermentation time. You can see that they're well risen, and I floured the top a little bit. If I push into them, you can see there's still some responsiveness there. There's still a spring back, but it's rather sluggish and it doesn't completely come out, so I can still see my finger dinks in there. So that kind of tells me that's ready, and I don't want to push it too far beyond that point, because if it starts to get too weak, the dough becomes unstable. That one needed a bit of help. I've got semolina on the peel. And now I need to splash the dough so that it can open up. So I'm going to take my knife at about 30 degrees to the loaf and sweep it so I get nicely through the crust. Speed is important here, very sharp knife is important, but also speed. I'm not pressing down onto the dough, I'm just cutting, sweeping the knife through, and I want to make sure I go right to the ends. And they're ready for the oven. We'll have a look when they come out. These are out of the oven now. We've got a lovely bloom, lovely rise spring in the oven. Nice pattern on the outside, so I'm very happy with those. These we've sold, so we're not going to cut into those. We can have a look at this one, and this is interesting. It sort of burst a little bit there, and I think that's because I didn't put enough water into the oven, so this bit of the crust hardened, it found a weak spot and blew itself out there, so it's a bit uneven, not too bad, but I always cook a few extras just in case, so we can cut into this one and have a look at the crumb. And you can see we've got a nice open crumb, a few nice random holes to give it some character, and a nice thick, crisp, chewy crust. Delicious.